So we are basically in faith missionaries to Glade Park and to Glade Park Church. I don't know how many of you knew that. So this is a little trailer about the mission that we work for.
They say it's the simple things in life that are the most extraordinary. In Faith is an organization with this simple mission. We exist to enable called and committed followers of Christ to serve with purpose and passion within our nation's borders. If you look around at your own town or city, from the downtown high-rises of the metropolises to the backwoods, not-so-beaten paths, it's pretty clear that we're broken and in need of a lot of help. God is faithful and has blessed in faith for almost 200 years. We are an evidence of God's grace, a testimony of Christ's followers that started so long ago. This is who we serve. We are committed on sharing the love of Christ with young people through summer camps, after-school programs, and community centers. We serve underserved pastors in rural settings and church leaders abandoned by our culture. We help equip those called to chaplaincy, police, military, and in hospitals. Our people are often called to the forgotten and neglected in remote areas, from the elderly to those in prison. We look for innovative ideas to serve people. We are expanding our ministry to elevate people who have a creative passion to express who Jesus is in beautiful ways. We want to see broken homes that have been torn apart, put back together. People healed from addiction. Parents imaging Jesus to their kids. The elderly esteemed. Lonely people in community. Legacies sparked that lead to generations of Christ followers. That is what In Faith is about. From the cities to the countryside, In Faith has people on a mission to testify about Jesus. People loving people all across this land. In Faith is an organization that wants to enable people empowered by the Spirit to love others because Jesus first loved them. It's that simple.
I don't know, some of you might have recognized the guy that was the shepherd. He had a ministry to shepherds up in Montrose, Steve Christ. He pastored this church for a few years, I think, and really good guy. And he would go out into, he had a pickup with a camper on it, and he would drive way, way out, and then he would hike miles and miles, and he would minister to the shepherds that were way out in the bush, and he was quite a guy. But so I wanted to just share this morning kind of about our ministry to Glade Park. And it's been a while since I've actually preached. It's been a nice break, but I'm really kind of excited to share with you what God has placed on my heart. And I know some of you are visiting this morning, so this may be a little strange because I don't usually preach about myself, and I don't like preaching about myself. And, you know, many of you that come here often know that I've struggled with feelings of inadequacy in my role as pastor. And I told my pastor friend just this week, I said, Jeremy, I said, this sermon feels like I have to give a sales pitch about a product myself that I'm not sure is all that great or worthy of much, you know. But let me say it this clearly, that there is only one reason that Glenda and I am still here this morning, and there's one reason the Glade Park Bible Church continues to thrive And it's not because we are particularly worthy or perfect or free from mistakes. It's because of God. And it's by His Spirit that we are worthy, and that it's by His perfection and by His protection that this has all worked. And when I think back over the years, from the very first Sunday I stepped into this pulpit until now, there's only one explanation for why things have worked out, and that is God. And I sincerely believe that God is powerful and that He can and He will work through a very flawed, sometimes broken, sometimes confused, and even scared pastor for His glory and the advancement of His kingdom. So here's how I kind of see our morning going. First, I'd like to talk about how we got here, a bit of history for those who may not know this story. And then I'm going to share some of the impact I think that we've had in the community and how it's rippled outward. And after that, I'll talk about what where we're going from here, perhaps. And finally, I'll close with an update on our fundraising. So I've titled today's message, Continuing in Faith for Such a Time as This. Now, does anyone recognize where the phrase for such a time as this comes from? Esther, absolutely. As it happened, I was reading Esther in my devotions this week. And one morning it hit me. My struggle to embrace my role as pastor here at Glade Park might actually be sin, or at least a lack of trust in God's leading for my life. I wrote this in my journal on Wednesday. I wrote, I love the story of Esther. It's so encouraging that as we follow God, He appoints us to be at a certain place at a certain time for such a time as this. Being led to Glade Park Church had to be none other than by the providence of God. So why do I doubt? Unquote. Before Esther became queen, she was a young orphan. She lost her parents. She had both parents. She didn't have parents. And she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, who loved her as his own. Esther 2:7 says that. So she grew up in exile without parents. I imagine she had some really tough times probably growing up. She could have felt forgotten, but she wasn't. God was shaping her heart through hardships, preparing her for a purpose that she couldn't yet see. And the orphan girl one day would stand before a king and save her people. God considers the overlooked. Your beginnings don't define your destiny. His hand does. Like Esther, you and I may be in preparation for such a time as this. And that truth is something that I have to hold on to every single day. And this week, as I thought about this, and I was preparing for this sermon, I had to think about that. It's been, I think it's going on 13 years that I've been doing this and standing in this pulpit. I need that reminder. And I believe you do too. And I'm going to tie Esther's story into how I came to Glade Park, a little bit more as we go on. But I want to ask the question, how did we get here? So there are many places I could go with this, but I want to kind of stick to the events that I think led me here. And I will tell you up front, I am not good with dates or even remembering things in the order that they happened in my life. And I'm not sure why, but it's just the way it is. I do know that at age 12, I asked Jesus into my heart during a revival meeting by going up to the altar call, an altar call that was given by this guy. I found a picture of him in some archives somewhere. Don't ask me why, but there he is. And then later I was baptized, both of which impacted my journey into ministry. Another thing I believe and remember that plays into my standing before you today is the call to preach from a young age, although I did not recognize it as such until later in life. When I remembered how I would stand in front of my dresser mirror and prepare and pretend that beyond the mirror were thousands of people whom I was preaching to. And I bet my family thought I was mad. And some of them still think I'm mad. But growing up in the church, I had many opportunities to teach classes, give talks, and even give an occasional sermon. So after graduating from high school in 1980 and working for a few years, I went on a 7-month mission trip to Scotland and France with Eastern Mennonite Board of Missions. I grew up a Mennonite. And at that time, they partnered with Youth with a Mission, YWAM, and used some of their bases for training. And we lived in this one called Overton House in Scotland. It was quite an experience. And then after this adventure, I knew I wanted to be in full-time mission. And so when I got back, I enrolled and attended Heston College in Heston, Kansas, which is a 2-year Mennonite school. I graduated with a 2-year associate degree in religious studies and a kind of a minor in social justice studies. And there I met a gentleman named Henry Weems who got a team of us to come to Grand Junction to help start a church, which eventually folded. And this is a time in my life where I'm going to skip over much, not because I don't want to talk about it or it's too painful or I'm too ashamed to talk about it, although there's a part of all of that that's true. But it was during this time that I met my first wife, gained a daughter by marriage, and a daughter by birth. And after 7 years was divorced, became a prodigal son, and was found again by the grace of God. Just kind of walked away from my faith in church for 2 years, did whatever I wanted, you know, the whole kind of prodigal son thing. So now forward to like 2002 or somewhere around there. Started going back to church. I met Glenda, and but I was still struggling with many things. Glenda and I were married in July 5th of 2002, but I was still pretty unhappy, pretty struggling, unfulfilled, floundering man. And let me pause here, and I want to say that I believe all of these experiences were preparing me to begin uncovering the passion that I had long ago for being a pastor. Much as I'm sure Esther did at times in her life have these struggles that were preparing her for something in her life down the road, that God was going to use her for such a time as this. And a few years later, seeing my despair, my sadness, and emptiness, a friend invited me to a Warrior of Heart camp, which is a Christian men's ministry. And many of you have heard about how that was so impactful to my life. But for today, I don't have the time to really go into that. And I'll share that with those of you that would like more details on that. But for today, just know that my heart was healed, and the call to pastor was to be a pastor was uncovered once again. And I prayed, Jesus, if this is real, allow me to preach 4 times this coming year. And it happened. And then the following year, I started doing more fill-in preaching and here and there. And for a pastor friend, I think I preached in Moab once or twice, and in Marble, a pastor friend preached there. And then somehow I started preaching here. Not even sure, somebody might fill me in on that, but anyhow, I got hooked up here, and I think I preached like maybe once or 2 times, and then pretty soon they rooked me in for doing more, and then eventually they asked me to be their pastor, and then I think there was like I said no because I wasn't quite sure about some theological stuff, and then like 6 months later they come back and said, well, I think we can kind of work on that. And I think I said yes, and I became their pastor, and 13 years later, here I stand, and it's been really, I think I'm gonna have to, since I hit the wrong. Yeah. So anyhow, so eventually I was asked to serve as your pastor, and here we are. Now, there was much more to it in terms of how the church helped me raise my own support, and I quit my job with Terminex to do so. But here's the beauty of this. As I read the story of Esther, I remember all the hard things in my childhood and teenage years, college years, but also the good times. You know, the loss that I experienced and Esther experienced. But people like her uncle, Mordecai, who raised her with love. You know, now I was never an orphan physically, but in some ways I was, other ways. The scary times, the times of depression that I've struggled with, the good times, the mistakes I made, my divorce, college, my time in missions overseas. There were some lonely times there. All of this, as with Esther, was preparing me for such a time as this. And I'm sure Esther was not perfect. Me and Leah talked a little bit about that, and she stopped at the coffee shop this week. And I have to believe it was only God protecting this little flock for such a time as this. And for whatever reason, he chose me for such a time as this. Listen to this verse from Esther 4:14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. See, if you, Glade Park Church, had not listened, and I would not have listened, God would have protected you all in some other way. However, I would have missed out on a great blessing, friendships, and a calling that was addressed to me in front of my dresser. You see what I did there? again, with that goes a deep belief that God is powerful and can and will work through a very flawed, sometimes broken, confused, and scared pastor for his glory and for the furthering of his kingdom. I mean, look at all the characters in the Bible. Were any of them perfect? What I love about that is that we can look at each other and realize that it's not about us. It's not about me. It's about God. Now, I don't want to spend much time on the next point, which is our impact and ripples. As a church, we have been very active over the years. We have great pictures on our Facebook page. I was just going through them, and I suggest you look at them. We have fed the homeless. There's a picture there. The second picture is VBS. We've hosted every year for the community. We love our Christmas Eve service. That's a great picture of Kate and Max. Max looks like, I know they're so little, right? Max looks like he just saw a ghost. I love that picture. That's why I put it in there. And then Norm, we did that rebuilding project down the road here for Jenny Bohr, I think it was. We've done many baptisms over the year. I'm not even sure who that is, to be honest about it. We fed the firemen, on their training days. We donate to the firemen to the fire department every year, $700. I think it's a little bit more now, actually. We support the pregnancy center. We just had them up here. The Reverend Rhythms, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, a mission in Uganda. And over the years, we've supported various overseas missions. We support Camp Hope in the Nelsons, Mountaintop Retreat in the Eastons, Twin Peaks Camp in the Steponics. We've given multiple one-time gifts to many causes throughout the years. We've given checks, gift cards. When I first came here, this was so awesome. I was often blown away because on a Sunday morning, somebody would say, I've heard so-and-so needs food. And somebody would say, well, let's see, I think we should give $1,000. And somebody else would say, yeah, I think that's what God's telling me. And then somebody and the treasurer would write a check, and the check would be delivered that day. And I was like, that is so cool, but yet so irresponsible. No, I'm just kidding. I thought that was really cool. We don't do that anymore. We kind of do a little different, but we still get lots of money. This little church gives, what if we decided we're going to give away every year 25% of what we bring in? Most churches have a hard time giving 10% away. Okay. I'm just bragging on you guys. Praise God. Yeah. Cassidy got it, man. She's clapping for this. All right. So anyhow, boy, I completely lost my train of thought. I completely went off the teleprompter. So anyhow, we've just done incredible work here. And, we've done, we've checks, gift cards, food drives. We've helped people in the community over the years. We've been really involved in the community outreaches that the community center's done. But you guys are the heroes of the day, really. And when we've said, hey, let's do this, you guys have jumped in. And you did it with all your hearts. Like the Jews responded to Esther's call to fast and to join together in prayer when they got to this point where they realized that they were going to be slaughtered. Esther said, well, let's pray, let's fast. And I think about the ripples, Jonathan Bohr, who now serves as a missionary pilot in Thailand. And I think about like Anna Lee and Casey and Louie and Max and all the young people that have went out to work in camps and, overseas and did mission trips and all that. And I'm probably missing a whole bunch of people. It's just amazing. The ripples that have went out from this little church, because we've impacted people's lives. It's amazing. Praise God. And I'd like to think that me and Glenn had a little bit of something to do with that. And I think of the people I've touched. I told Lonnie, I said, I'm going to mention you. And he was like, oh, you don't have to. But I think about when I met Lonnie in 2019 in the hospital. And I think about the friendship we built. And I love Lonnie. I'm so glad I met him and was able to lead him to the Lord. And I just think of all of you. The impact that you've made on our lives, on my life. Lonnie's here because of our prayers. You talk about ripples. Me and Glenda, we've done some homeless ministry, women's ministry. I've been involved in Warrior of Heart, men's ministry, community outreaches, repairs, just getting involved. I've done some prison ministry. Glenda loves the senior ministry. I did quite a few weddings. We've done some funerals, unfortunately. We just try to jump in wherever we can. And by the grace of God, have an impact on our community. And I pray to God that we've led Glade Park to the best of our abilities for such a time as this. And hopefully we've impacted and helped the ripples go out into our community, the larger community in the world. And so I think the next question is, what's our next step? And the next step is to get my page turned. When I think of this question, I think of Esther and Mordecai and the huge problem that they and the Jews were up against. Complete annihilation, complete slaughter. And they went to fasting and prayer. And of course, we are not facing such devastating circumstances, or at least not yet. Honestly, I can't tell you the answer to this question. Is it to build a building? And I think for many of us, that's the most obvious answer. When we have 40 to 45 people here, I think, yes, that's the answer. But some Sundays when we have 15, 20, 25, I wonder if that's the answer. Some days when I look at the hate towards Christians in our culture, I wonder how long we're going to be able to use church buildings. Anyway, I believe only God really knows what our next step is. As he alone knew what the first sermons I needed to preach as a new pastor should be about. Becoming a spiritual family. And so I believe our next step is to live as the church and the people God has called us to be for such a time as this. He will bring us a person to lead us to build for such a time as this, if that is to be, or for whatever is to be. It just strikes me that perhaps we need to go to prayer and fasting. There is so much at stake in putting up a building. So much can go wrong. And the only way it can be done right is by an absolute move of God, where every step is ordained and led, orchestrated, and approved by God. However, for now, we can continue to do what we do, make an impact, and send out God ripples by bringing people into the light of Jesus, calling them to be in authentic relationship with Jesus, and bring them out of sin. The last thing I need to do is talk about where we are in our fundraising. And this is a hard part of being a missionary, talking about fundraising. And I'll try to make this as simple as possible. And I really do not like this part of it. But I'm just going to be honest, and I'm going to be open, and I'm going to be upfront. So each year, In Faith asks us missionaries to set a fundraising goal based on what we need to live on. And so this graph shows our goal, which has been $60,000 a year, which you see at the bottom of that graph. So we received many. So this year, so far, we've raised $42,000. Much of this comes from what the church pays us. And in all the years that we've raised support, we have never reached our full goal of $60,000. However, through housing and expense allowances, we made it work. And we're thankful that God has always supplied our needs. So after In Faith, this deducts its administrative fees, and they're very fair fees. The actual amount that we've received or have received this year is about $38,000. And we get a lot of benefits out of that partnership, out of that, what they take in fees. So out of that $38,000 comes my base pay. They reimburse our expenses and a housing allowance that I can claim as a pastor. And that all comes back to me in my paycheck. So I spoke with Dan, In Faith's CFO, this week, and I just want to share with you what he told me. He explained that In Faith recommends missionaries maintain a 3 to 6 month surplus of funds. And currently we have about 3 months of reserves, including pay and expenses. In other words, if all support would stop today, it would take about 3 months for us to run out of funds based on our previous spending and expenses. And so his advice was to increase our support per month by $500 or $6,000 a year, and that would bring us closer to our $60,000 total. I guess another way of putting it is that we are not keeping up with our expenses. And trust me, Glenda does a good job of being frugal. I don't know when the last time is I've had a pair of jeans from her house. So I want to be clear, though. I don't expect this small church to carry that burden. I've never expected this church to carry that burden. That's why I raise my own support. So what I am simply asking is, if God is leading you to partner with us financially above and beyond your tithe, we would be gratefully appreciated. More than that, however, we treasure your prayers, your encouragement, and your love. One immediate need I want to mention is that for the winter, I do need tires for my truck. So there are several ways to partner with us. First would be to just tithe faithfully to Glade Park Church, because some of that tithe eventually comes to us. Pray for our family and our ministry. That, I think, honestly should be at the top of the list, because I think that's more important than anything else, to be honest about it. You can always just give one-time or monthly financial gifts. Maybe if we have a specific project, you can join in that. But of course, we will let you know. Share our mission with others that you think may want to support us, or connect us with people that that maybe we can reach out to. So I guess the other question you might have is, how can we actually help you? How would you actually get money to us or into our accounts or whatever? Well, you can hand it to us and we can send it in, forward it to In Faith. You can give online through In Faith at infaith.org. If you are a bit computer challenged, you might find this intimidating. I know the office. If you call them, they will help you do that, or you can call me. I'll be glad to try to help you do that. You can call the office at the phone number up there. You can just send checks to them, and just note on there our names, and they should get it deposited to where it should go. And there is one other way, and this is something new for me, that for farmers and ranchers that I've heard about. It's called Steer Incorporated, and I don't know anything that much about it, but I have some information back there. It's a non-denominational Christian mission. It's global and stateside, and it's kind of, just let you read it, but it's steerincorporated.org if you want to learn more about it. It's another way that you can give to missionaries. So I thought it was kind of interesting that something you might be interested in. So that's all I really had. I just want to say, though, that I love you guys. You guys are awesome. And 13 years, it's been really amazing to be your pastor. I've made mistakes, and you guys have still loved me. Some of them have been pretty funny mistakes. Um, yeah, some not so fun, but we've gotten through them, and here we are. So God bless you guys. So I guess I ought to give time for questions. So if there's any questions, who would take questions? Andy. I think in faith maybe. Yeah, because I know my boss, John Lewis, he gets some support through them. But I don't know for sure. Mhm.